Okay, and you can hear us?
Oh, Gangataji Dele.
And you can hear Geshe also?
Oh, that I didn't say that.
All right, let's get the show on the road. So, sorry, I also noticed I got an email from somebody who asked about the library talk yesterday. They weren't able to make it. So that is on YouTube and on Facebook. So you can find it there if you're interested.
Oh, yeah, Gangataji Dele. Tene Ganga Taki would you want to show you?
So first of all, Tashi Dele, greetings to everybody. Geshe hopes that you are all well and happy.
Oh, Tanganzo, the rich and the Lacachete, and in Araso Garsekar. Oh, Tapoge, Tachimboyo, that said the Poge, Sumazoya chatting on the Lacachis.
And so, of course, our task here really is to take that thing which is very precious, which holds our potential, which is our mind, and to purify it.
Oh, that's said the Langarosugota, Deshi, Nika, Deshi, Tatu, Deshi Kanga, Teaga Kopage. Coral Nipachi, Rungil Yaret, and Inayo, that tell Pureka, the Kimomochi you are telling on the Purtons of Yares.
So, our mind, let us be clear, it has this potentiality which can allow us to reach a state of not only temporary, but also that ultimate lasting happiness. But there are many things that cover it, that obscure that potential. And so, really, our practice is to clear away those things that cover our potential, which we call obscurations.
There Pena Medu Pematen Dolishawaretene, Co Dog, Kini to teach Korogujuli was.
So it's a little bit like a lotus flower, right? If we think about a lotus flower that starts to grow in the muck of a swamp, we know that by the time it touches the surface of the swamp, the flower that blooms is completely unstained by that mud.
Oh, that then Noji, that in Nicalangaroso, say, oh, that Tandiga, then Rojete, Rogesanam, say, Coro, Coinel Yares, Cois Bognolo Yares, Ina Coral Coi, she Goyon, Guillaumares.
So we're a little bit like that lotus that grows from the mud, but blossoms at the surface and is untouched by the mud.
Coinel Yar was say Coro.
Yes, yes.
And Coral Ngola, Coivitan, or that Guillaumares.
So it's a bit of the same situation with us. We ourselves here, along with our mind, are in this swamp of samsara. But the ultimate nature of the mind is not in the nature of samsara.
Ota Mombochi, Tetanji, say Koropoge, Tatu,
and so this is the reason why many people say that when you look at the final nature of the mind, at the true nature of the mind, we are already Buddha, right? Some traditions of Buddhism express it like that. And to be clear, the traditions that are asserting that, they're not doing that without a source, because there actually are within the sutras many source texts that say something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Loso, yewa yomares.
Remato Naroso said, and then he said, Rojitatu, Sunji Resene, Lagmares.
Yewa yomares and a candes.
Sunji said, Rojitatu Tumbani Giara, Calacando Casamba.
Yes.
And then Naroso said, Tumbani,
yeah.
Rojo Corongoli Yaman was.
Right. Yene?
Or Nets Chibana, which is.
Yene?
So
what we would say is that from the point of view of the emptiness of our mind, and from the point of view of the emptiness of a Buddha's mind, it is the same emptiness, right? So from that perspective, there is absolutely no differentiation, right? From the nature point of view, it is the same. But we are not yet Buddha, because that nature of the mind for us is obscured by the stains of the afflictions.
대지 가서 야보 아니 손도 가레스.
So we can think that the nature of our mind is completely unobscured, right? Ultimately, it is free of those afflictions. In the same way that pure, clean water is unobscured by any particles or by mud. In the same way that a cloudless sky is free of any obscurations, right? Ultimately, we can speak about the mind's fundamental nature like that.
다 이나요 빼나 세코로 자서 첨보 노질 헬레 셔와 코로 예 내서테 드리지 아레스. 자서 첨보 헬레 지아라 와스 밀루 메비 자서 노지.
Yeah.
다 이나요 류도 드리지 알라 때네 자시 발란다 마라 코로파게
So we can think of this vastness of the fundamental mind as being like an ocean, right? And its purity and clarity is revealed to us, like on those very calm, cloudless, and windless days when the ocean is very still. But often, the nature of our mind, due to the obscurations, due to the winds of the affliction, is not identifiable, just like winds will stir up the waves, the surf on the ocean.
오타가로서 세우된 노지랜디 와스 자치발라 노지 같은 벽을 스타스는 내가 제도 몸보지라 때네 저한다마다 노톤다마다 발라 노지긴다마다 모여요.
So our mind is like that. Its true nature is obscured by a lot of the mental activities, the mental projections, the worry and the fears that are like winds that stir up the waves, right? So that the nature of the mind becomes obscured.
다 드네네서 뭐뭐 용거를 되는 간주 던지가 노도도 초와 초매바 대지 슈스파 만도네라 때못다와 노지치대에서 블랙까지 도서나 드네 가디나 올헬레지저와요.
So the trick here is not to be deceived by those projections, by those afflicted tendencies and so forth, but to first take a step back and just observe, pretend like you're just kind of in a theater watching a film. Just step back and observe. That's the first step.
오다 대지 용어대가 자와 컨트롤이나래. 오다 대샤이나래. 든릴레비칼 모시바시니 콜 버게 세고 로지 간제젠도. 네스 간제젠도. 코르 때못다와 노지지 따야가 버게. 네스 레소나. 아니 컨트롤된 대처가 네바티 노토가 말레스. 야 류도 자트는 용어도 와서 가서 대지를 때못다는 가서 가면 되와스. 류두자도 체 책은노나 노질류긴 집바 가서 용거든 내서 두자
그래 seguiu chulo
류그 내서 두자 용거 chulo 밀류 콜로치 용거도 와서 노질룽
lungi colo
류두자 용거도
ale nökendi
호텔 파르 호텔 못다와 되네바 이 가서 가면 두와
lungi can need to do so sorry a new word for me. So if you're in a film, if you're in a movie theater, right, and you're watching a film where there's a twister, where there's a tornado on the screen, right, of course a tornado is something very disturbing and very destructive. But if you were just watching it as the observer, right, like in a film, that's not going to disturb your mind so much. So that's what Geshe means by creating distance between ourselves and, for example, that instance of anger or that other affliction.
오다 컨트롤도 대변인데 저 접어도 컨트롤 접어 우월 받진 놓자서나 드니 걸리라고 하면 와서
Once we become overwhelmed and fall under strongly that attachment or that anger, then it's going to be much more difficult to pacify it, right?
오다 던지지 이자 세 제모제도 시사야 돼. 같이 뭐지 수근도 왔어. 다 컨트롤 때못다와 노돌 때못다와 저와도 던질 때못다와 노지질래 같이 해서 좋더나 가디나 소설 보게 렐레지 아레스.
So then, really, this is kind of the secret, to have a playful attitude where we are standing back, and whether it's the attachment, whether it is the anger, whether it is just that namtok, right, that discursive thought, just kind of standing back and observing it, right, observing the play of the mind.
빼나가로서 나가세야지 와래. 근데 이나요 다 나가세야지 내서 가르는 소소가 보게 따야 먹어도 왔어. 소소솔. 나가세야지 와래. 왔어. 나한테 내서 가르는 소소솔 따져줘야 먹어도 왔어.
And also when we're investigating the self, it's a little bit like switching the screen switching the observing direction to ourselves. And we can also observe the I or the self and how it's functioning also from that space of distance, right?
다 새 코로이나 새지 새 연다 받때마다 다녀서 뭐 요아래 있는데.
And also within the mind, parts of the mind can observe what is happening in other parts of the mind. semchik semjenda chittatu.
야, 그래서 아까서 왔어. 강가서 새 맞지바래 되는 새 연다 다야 뭐 요아래.
So they're both minds kind of within the broader consciousness, but one mind can observe what's happening with another mind that is arising, right? This is also possible as part of our analysis. And so when we talk about the four close placements of mindfulness, the close placement of mindfulness on the mind can incorporate a practice like that. So if we are able to engage in those kind of observations, it will be very helpful. But we want to start from a space where the body and the mind are relaxed and calm. Right. So some religious traditions, when they talk about calming the mind, they say that we have to stop whatever is arising in the mind, the thoughts of a house, the thoughts of another person, that we want to completely kind of empty the mind of all objects. So they say that actually these things do not exist, right? But because they are arising in the mind as existing, this is what causes our perturbation, causes our upset. So actually, we just need to completely get rid of those things totally. Yep. We say, however, that we don't have to stop all of these objects from arising in the mind. That's not the right approach to the problem, because it's not merely from the flower or the house or whatever appearing in your mind that causes the disturbance. It's not really the appearance of the object that is causing the disturbance ultimately. The problem is when the object is perceived within the mind, there is then a superimposition of an aspect of it that is not in accord with its actual mode of abiding. In other words, we are superimposing something onto it, which is nothing to do with the way that it really is. And so about this particular point, there are actually many views. Even within the Buddhist traditions of Tibet, you will see this topic handled differently. So after this discussion, let us just take a moment, though, just as our beginning point, to empty our mind of thoughts and objects, just as a way of getting a stillness, a calmness within the mind. So any feelings or thoughts that are arising that are unhelpful, think that they dissolve just like clouds into the sky. There is nothing pinpointable to hold on to.
세계 로징 알레 만다바다 세레지도 셔와 좀만다고 데스차소 somebody.
Think now the mind is abiding in a very different way from before. It is now still and relaxed.
세 로제 류마테 이나요다 나로서 레가치니다 숑바 아니 숑뱅고를 야파 야포치기 somebody.
In this mind, in its fundamental state, is something that is neutral. But let us use this neutral vastness and move it towards bringing forth this mind of love.
롱라 대시 템보 기바노지 롱기니엘 데노지 기바노지 아니 마제 세제 서도슬이나이다 대시 템보지 그건도 somebody.
And we can start developing this by thinking, I myself need happiness and the causes of happiness. Those close to me need happiness. All human beings need happiness. Until finally we think, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. Bring forth this mind of love.
묘주 소소가 녀도 묘주 자첨보도 오다 들이가심뭐지 somebody.
And as we wish for this happiness for all those beings, really do that on the basis of a feeling of connectedness and closeness to all of them.
소소가 소마 누지 대학다 고가 차송하지다 소소로요 다 대출라 도르미 아늘레가 템보치 somebody.
I definitely have all of the conditions, the facility to be able to achieve the happiness of these beings just as I wished. I must bring forth the resolve not to waste this opportunity.
대다용화지스 아니 템바니 소지죠 대지스 도마나 소바다 샤이 강가라서 제치다요 somebody.
And so then from that wish, let us visualize in front of us, perhaps the jewel all-in-one Buddha Shakyamuni, or perhaps the vast assembly of the field of accumulation with the holy beings such as Buddha, Tara, and all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So we'll do our recitation now. Karisege. Naso. So we'll begin with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. Dömba jom den de shin she ba da jom ba yang da ba zo be song ge re ba dang sha su den ba de wa she ba shi de jen ba che bu de we ka lo jo wa la na me pa la da mi na je den ba song ge jon de pe jawa sha ja du wa la ja ze lo je de kya zu ji den ba chong de shin che ba da chong ba yong da ba zu be song ge re ba dang sha zu den ba de wa she ba ji de jen ba
Chevo lewe kalo jowa lana meba la domi nangi temba sonji chonden de pejawa shaja tuwa chanza lo cheda jaza jo temba chonden de deje jeba da chomba yonda ba zobe sonji jeba don jaza temba dewa sheba jite jeba chebu duwe Kalo jowa lana meba la domi nangi temba songi chonende pejawa shaja duwa la jaza lo chede gyatsu chi.
So we'll do the praise to the Heart Sutra in Tibetan and then the Heart Sutra itself in English. Mazanje me shira baro je maje manga namge ngowo ni so so rari yeshe che yawa deso jaye yumla shanzo. I prostrate to the three noble, rare, sublime ones. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata gate gate bhara samgate bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. We'll do the prayer to the lion-faced Dakini. Kala jubi nijo damba ne ngunji zuzu ngawe dudo je duwa pola maye puje je niso kante tsula chanzo ro aka
Aga Samaranda Shatara Samaraya Aga Samaranda Aga Samaranda Yadara Samaraya Aga Samaranda Aga Samaranda Shatara Samaraya
Teyata Gade Gade Paragade Parasamgade Bodhi Soha Papa Kunshu Sungi Dembe Dogi Chi Doba Joji Meba Joji Shiva Joji Drage Baji Midumbe Chongyamba Tamche Shanti Guru Ye Soha Giri Tondra Gyaju Shiva Dam Midu Nebe Kendang Dewa Dam Dumba Duji Buzo Zojo Be Tashi Dejan Dende Dele Jo. So do the short mandala. Saji Begi Joshi Meto Jan Rila Jinji Nide Gyamba Di Sange Shindo Mede Bowa Ye Drogo Nanda Jila Jeva Jo Ito Guru Ratna Mendala Kona Yadaya. Refuge and Bodhicitta.
Sonje Chedan Soge Chena La Jongju Badu Dani Jasu Je Dagi Chenyen Gibe Sono Je Dola Bejo Songe Droba Sonje Chedan Soge Chena La Jongju Badu Dani Jasu Je Dagi Chenyen Gibe Sono Je Dola Bejo Songe Droba Sonje Chedan Soge Chenam La Jongju Badu Dani Jasu Je Dagi Chenyen Gibe Sonam Gi Drola Bejo Sonje Droba Jo. Oh yeah, that was this one. What that to me shawa, and what that to Dani shawa ni.
So we talk about the actual session, and during the actual sessions, the activities at the beginning and the activities at the end are both very important. Oh, do we want to take the refuge prayer off and put the screen back on?
Oh yeah, this one. Ta tere ta tengo to me shawa ta kalon kaze ta chi sheba jiba yina yo dise jiba yina yo ta so la ten ni pamanta de ta zo kalon la ten ni.
So we know the activity at the beginning, the motivation is so important, right? Because it's been stated many times that it's not necessarily the time of the session, how long it is that determines it's how meritorious it is. It's not necessarily the difficulty of the session that determines how meritorious it is. It's really establishing the motivation that will maximize the merit of a session.
Da shonji semi nyole yan ro ma chi kine ko ne ba shi de ke de ro chin ze de isa ko ha le ta ko azo ko ba chen mo ya isa ti ba chen mo so ya.
So we know that ignorance grasping at the self is what roots us within samsara and causes so many of the problems, but especially we know that it is this self-cherishing or a self-centered attitude which is really something that holds us back.
And that
self-cherishing, sorry, I forgot one thing, that self-cherishing is powerful because of habituation, right? So when we bring forth the motivation, we habituate ourselves to a different outlook, and this makes the session more powerful. And so for those of us who are gathered here, right, we can begin to cultivate that motivation with these thoughts of love and compassion. But if we are somebody who really aspires to be a practitioner of the Mahayana path, we want to try to bring forth that wish of bodhicitta. So let's just take a moment to develop that motivation first by putting the body and mind into a state of stillness and bringing the four elements of the body into balance. So we know that when we bring the four elements into balance, one of those elements is wind. So when wind becomes malleable, then the mind can be more easily subdued because wind and mind travel together. And also in this way, the blood, chakras, all of those components are purified. So tapping into the power of that wind element, then using this to kind of really go strongly into the fundamental mind. Think that I don't want to use the vastness of this fundamental mind for something small. I really want to use the vastness of this fundamental mind to bring forth something great. So how do we go about thinking about how we want to use that? Well, let us think about samsara, the situation of cyclic existence, and think about how not only myself, but also others, we experience so many problems in this situation. And so my responsibility is to tap into my potential so that I can honor my responsibility not only to myself, but also to others, right? To free them from the difficulties of samsara. So think, may all sentient beings be parted from the suffering of samsara and from the causes of that suffering. Bring forth a strong compassion within your mind. Think, if I'm real about it, the only type of being that can really effectively free all of those migrators from the suffering of samsara is a fully enlightened Buddha. Therefore, may I achieve complete enlightenment for their sake.
시제 농기제 강가 초대요 된데 가지 터다 답아 된보야 부제도 그래 소마지
If I set my mind to it, I have all the inner and outer conditions necessary to be able to achieve it.
뭐야 뭐야 다 걸로로 여반도지 달리라고 여만 왔어 다 그게 저저대 다 숑바도 니 지슈를 가세 됐다 니네 디슈를 그 야레스
So, of course, it's not easy, right, to actually be able to achieve that aim that we set out in our motivation. But we set that aim big, and then in the session, we cultivate our love and compassion to work towards that.
숑바도 니 지슈를 파다 레 돈비갈 판자야 대세한테 주는 파 때문에 타야 돼 갈래요 아마도 진짜사소나 그러니까 디나 기버레스
So, to kind of set our mind in the direction of that love and compassion, that initial, what can I call it, recalibration is difficult. But once we're accustomed to thinking in that way, then actually bringing forth love and compassion becomes quite simple, quite easy.
아고서와서 어다 릴 보게 빠진다고 들리가시 레바이나요 던디게 셀인데 마토네 기고 진로다 소소라요 거까지 뭐요 아레스
So actually, if we develop our love and compassion starting from now, even when we have like big obstacles to our practice, like let's say that our body becomes very sick or painful, we'll be able to tap into that love and compassion and cultivate it quite easily, even in those circumstances.
어다 로바 조데 돈이 또 비시라데 그요 하상 간조니까 녀도 진도야 아레스
And of course, we know that love and compassion, we also need that helper in place of the wisdom realizing emptiness. And that's why Geshe structures his teachings with something from the side of the method and also something about developing our wisdom.
가시가 돈이 또 비시라데 같이 가래 가시가 전주 세트 같이 가래 스타트 간조 소소소 따야지 아레스
So some scholars argue that actually it's the wisdom realizing emptiness that is the most important. Other scholars argue that bodhicitta is the most important thing to develop. Geshe is not going to say one or the other, but you can think from your own experience, which is the most important.
어다 알레데디 바치 다 된다 손질 야포게 타 아니르 쉬치 원로 아시아발라는 니가 코로파지 넌도면아 로바면은 도토무두아스
But we know, right, that if we want to draw closer and closer to that goal of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, complete and perfect enlightenment, we need to do this through cultivating that method and that wisdom.
어다 돈이 따와데 슈 도보지 메나 쇼주지 세지 보고 마리바라 코네와 니네든 도토야 말했어
We know, right, that view of emptiness is really important to have as part of the picture because bodhicitta alone is not enough to defeat that self-grasping ignorance, which is the root of the afflictions.
다요 돈이 초아데 슈 도보 템보지 여바 이나요 좀바도 니지 쇼주지 세게 초아 템보지 메나 로진들 코 네바테 도요 말했어
But the other side of that is as much of a refined understanding and experience of emptiness that we have, if we are not moistening that with the practices of love and compassion, we won't be able to defeat that self-cherishing or self-centered attitude, which is also something that holds us back.
그는 우야 쳔보지를 돈이 또 비시라데 가제 초아 넘버 여바 이나요 쇼주지 세게 로바 메나 시 녀저 녀모 바샤들 진네와 정도 도무두아스 야 쳔보지
Ale, tapti nyumungi bakchak me padrogi.
야야야
Yeah, Janchigi Yeah.
쇼주지 세트 로바 요나
Yeah.
아니 녀모 바샤 거로 좀 하죠야
Janchigi semropamen nyumungi bakchak.
오메오서 도무두아스
The other thing, which is really interesting to note here, is that wisdom realizing emptiness, if it is not informed by that mind of bodhicitta, although it can defeat the afflictions, it cannot defeat the afflictive obscurations or the latencies, the imprints left behind by the afflictions. So having understood that, then with a happy mind, let us turn to our text. So we'll begin with the Bodhisattvacaryāvatāra today.
Nipa dipa shabi lego me korol teta bares yuna you no let ne yala jetsu de yares.
So then Geshe said that actually the where we are is chapter number 2, which is the confession of negativities. And so although it is given as the compassion of negativities, many of the other limbs of practice are there as well.
다 yala dignone ta kazonga chebapi yala de ano chebapi yala no de rawatanda.
So where we are in terms of our discussion of this particular chapter is it's covering aspects of the 7 branches or the 7-limbed practice, and we are within the limb of offering. That's where we left off our discussion last time. So we did excelled offering, and now we are discussing unexcelled offering. Yunten jamso namla.
No, chita jamyo la supi. Jawa no la chenze pa. Teje dogi teje she gembo se to cheno chi.
Ale jitar jamyang la so pe gyawa namla. Okay.
Listen.
So Geshe said we covered a bit of verse 22 last time. That's where we ended, but there's a little bit more that he'd like to explore. So let us read out verse number 22. So we're on page 6 in the Bachelor translation, verse number 22. In the same way as Manjughosha and others have made offerings to the conquerors, similarly do I bestow gifts upon the Tathagatas, the protectors, their sons, and all.
Da lela wacheba yena nganzolana maybe cheba ka phageto mani da cho topo yona mato te mena apito mea ita ani jo me to korosu ta lana maybe cheba pito yo za te no jinga cheba please.
So why do we say we are offering in the same way as Manjughosha, right? I think everyone knows Manjughosha is Manjushri, right? Why do we say that we are offering in the same way as Manjushri? Because the unexcelled offerings means offerings that are presented through the lens of understanding of emptiness. We do not yet possess that understanding fully, so we just reference those beings who do and say, I make my offerings the same way as them.
So Geshe
said it wouldn't, we don't even need to think that it's just Manjushri. All of the 8 primary Bodhisattva disciples can offer in that way. So we think, just as those 8 Bodhisattvas make those offerings, so too do I make those offerings. Yes.
So there's
a story about this man who came from one of the far-flung regions in Tibet, and he came to the central cathedral, which is known as the Jokong, and this contains the Jo image of the Buddha, which is like the holiest image of Tibet. And as he came to that image of Jo Rinpoche, actually, he didn't know how to make a prayer, but he observed a woman there who was making prayers kind of very fluently and nicely. So he thought in his mind, just as she is praying, I pray that way too, right? So it's a little bit like this, right? We're deferring to those who can do it better than we can. So we might not be able to do it the same way as those bodhisattvas, but we can kind of approach the way that they do this. How do we do this? By thinking about the 3 spheres of the offering as lacking true existence. So ourselves who makes the offering lacks true existence, the substance of the offering itself lacks true existence, and the object of worship to which we present the offering also lacks true existence.
이네 전에 파신 요래 파시 주요 알아서 주소 주에 된 요래 가르쳐봐 이나이 대서도 이네 좀 총아지는 요래 시작했습니다.
And actually, within any of the 6 paramitas that we practice, right, this knowledge is said to be something that is very key.
다 던지지 다 제가 이는 컨트롤 계산 내바시 도요 말이세요. 예, 그렇다. 뭐 던지 소마 좀 지보게 되잖아.
Ale.
아니 컨트롤 매봐서야 돼서
Oh, so also another point about thinking about the emptiness of the 3 spheres, for example, in the offering, it's a way of protecting the merit, because when we think of it through the lens of emptiness, then anger is not able to diminish or degenerate those merits.
신주 전문도라 지지는 가려 용거로 와서 게는 게사 던지 반요래 셰베가라. 아니 군지 매봐서야 게사 될라. 아니 임바도 던지 저도 던지 게사 마도. 아니 시라게 생각했더니 게사도 좋아요 말이스.
And this connects actually with something that Shantideva discusses in this text of the Bodhisattvacaryāvatāra, that, for example, the roots of virtue that we practice through generosity and so forth, when one gets angry, those virtues can be diminished or degenerated. But when we come to this final paramita, the paramita of wisdom, the virtues that are accumulated through that are not able to be degenerated by anger.
강가 로제메바 녜서도 또 비고네 제바도 비교하이자 달라나메베 제바 야쇼도 걸어서 비교하레.
So the supreme unexcelled offering is offered by beings such as these 8 bodhisattvas, because when they engage in the practice of offering, they're able to comprehend perfectly how the one making the offering, the substance of the offering itself, and the object of worship to which one makes the offerings lack inherent existence. And they do this through the lens of having realized the emptiness of inherent existence. So in this way, we have completed the section on the making of offerings. And so now we begin with the next limb or branch practice, which is the limb of prostration.
With
bodies as numerous as atoms within the universe, I prostrate to all Buddhas of the 3 times, the Dharma, and the Supreme Community.
Ale, sorry,
sorry, I read out the wrong verse. Number 23. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, verse number 23. I glorify the oceans of excellence with limitless verses of harmonious praise. May these clouds of gentle eulogy constantly ascend to their presence.
하고서와 예때 자존나라 더 세리다 손지도 손지 선바수 투게 예때 자존 누지가 보게 할래야게 내서 지요하래.
So the oceans of excellence refers to the qualities of holy mind, the mental qualities of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, which are unfathomably vast like an ocean.
오다 텔레트는 그나로서 다치 좀보 가제가 보게 제토바 이나이 다딩이 되지기세.
And so we praise that with as beautiful words and melodies as we can manage.
그래서 대용예 저 대다라 녜바 건던 주지르지.
투양 연락 겸소 töroa 투양 년지
대다라 녜바 건던 주지르지 ngāgi 권에 다 샤자와들 된다.
May these clouds of gentle eulogy constantly ascend to their presence. So first prostrating through body, then through, first prostrating to their minds, then to the qualities of holy speech. So Geshe realized that he made an error here. So in the first part, I glorify the oceans of excellence with limitless verses of harmonious praise. This is actually praising using speech. Dene nipati. So actually, verse 23 is all about praising holy speech and using our speech to praise. And so verse 24 is making prostration and also think about the qualities of holy body. With bodies as numerous as all atoms within the universe, I prostrate to all Buddhas of the three times, the Dharma, and the supreme community. Mare. Nishi sajisa na nganso di kuden so chasangwa nganso kudi. Yeah. Dusum shepe sangye kun chudan soki chuchela shingdu kungi changye sosoki suporwa. Ale. Yeah. So I see, sorry. The problem is the order in the English and the order of the Tibetan is different. So we have to start in the second half of the verse, which is, I prostrate to all Buddhas of the three times. So this is the limitless Buddhas of the past, the present, and the future. And then it mentions the Dharma and the Sangha. So these are... So these are the objects of refuge. So the vocabulary. Yeah. Yes. So the Dharma, we prostrate also to the Dharma of scripture and the Dharma of realization. And we also prostrate to the supreme community, which is the Sangha. And as we prostrate to those three jewels, we do this with bodies as numerous as the atoms of the universe. So Geshe said that the holy beings actually give a really important instruction here, which is that we don't just visualize the bodies that we prostrate with as limitless like atoms, but we should think that all of these limitless bodies are actually the bodies of our countless rebirths since beginningless lifetimes in samsara. This is something really important to understand. So also, when we offer the prostration, that we're a little bit like Avalokiteshvara, who possesses the countless hands and eyes, right? He possesses those countless hands and eyes so that he can do things in kind of like a very multiplied way. So in the same way, we imagine that we prostrate with those multiple bodies, and we want to make sure that our entire body, including the crown of the head, touches the surface where we're prostrating. So really, if we think about the words here and also the essential instructions, there are many skillful ways to kind of maximize the practice. So likewise, I prostrate to all reliquaries, to the bases of an awakening mind. So Bachelor has translated. Oh, 하고서. Yeah. So so he says reliquaries, but I don't like this. I think we can just say stupa here because I think everyone knows what a stupa is. So it's likewise, I prostrate to all stupas, the basis of an awakening mind. And we can also think that as we prostrate to that, we prostrate to the embodiments of the Dharma, so the holy texts of the Tripitaka, the three baskets, and not only the Dharma of scripture, but also to the Dharma of realization. And then to all of the learned abbots and masters. So we could say all of the abbots and acharyas. The word is lupin here. So all the learned abbots and acharyas. And to all the noble practitioners. So verse number 26, so this is the practice of refuge. I seek refuge in all Buddhas until I possess the essence of awakening. Likewise, I seek refuge in Dharma and in the assembly of Bodhisattvas. So when we talk about refuge, for it to come about in a very completed way, we have to think about it in terms of kind of three steps. The first of these is purification. Nipati. Receiving a blessing. Sumpati. And the third is becoming certified in refuge, becoming accepted into refuge. And if these three are in place, then our practice of refuge will become a high quality and powerful. And it's not so easy to practice refuge, of course, because we have to have the causes for the mind of refuge in place. Otherwise, if we're just accumulating refuge verses, as it says, without actually having a real understanding, we just wear down the finger that's moving the mala, right? We're not really going to change our mind. So the first of these, the purification with the practice of refuge, we think that by going for refuge to the three jewels, may all of the negativities that I have accumulated from countless beginningless rebirths, especially in regard to the three jewels, may these be purified. And then the second one is thinking that we are receiving the blessings. And so the at this point, for receiving the blessings, as we engage in the practice of refuge, we can imagine lights and nectars emanating from the embodiments of the three jewels and dissolving into ourselves and blessing us. And becoming certified in refuge means that the mind of refuge is sufficient enough to be accepted, and we actually come under the care, come under the protection of the three jewels.
오다 대해서 조선에 다른 샹드야 보임 그래. 대해서 마천에 샹드야 보임 그 말에 오시부터 마서 들으시고 말했어.
And so the holy beings, so the holy beings say that when these three are in place, then one's practice of refuge is complete. When these three are not in place, they're not peace. And when we talk about the cause of refuge, right, we've talked about this before, but really it's very important to have both the minds of faith and the mind of a fear of samsara in place. So then this mind of fear, right? We're not just saying fear in a way of trying to scare or disturb the mind, but this fear of samsara actually has a particular purpose here. It is something that is enabling us to really go for refuge. And so in regard to this practice of refuge to the three jewels, Geshe said there's a story that we can tell connected with this. And if there's time later on in the session, he will share that. And so here we have completed the practice of refuge in verse 26. And so now when we come to verse number 27, this is really where the practice of the confession of the misdeeds opens up.
Oh yeah, da dipasha bala na nembo to jigo ne dipasha gare. Ta izate tenjo.
And when we purify negativities, we have to purify through the four opponent powers. So we can think of verse 27 as the power of the basis. Verse 27, with folded hands I beseech the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who possess the great compassion and reside in all directions. And so actually, it says reside in all directions, but if you want to be really literal about the text, you're prostrating to all Buddhas of the 10 directions. But Geshe said the 10 directions mean the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas abiding in all places. So this kind of a prostration and this mood is kind of like making a request. So we do this in a very kind of respectful way, just like if we were going to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example, we would do our request kind of very properly.
Jita tsawa nye tono, tumi chupi da nede, jisi yoro kojiba, nowa tena tongji ne.
Tongji ne dene? DJ la chikyo.
Dagi, tija ale tamo.
Ale, okay. So throughout beginningless cyclic existence in this life and in others, unknowingly I committed evil deeds and ordered them to be done by others. Overwhelmed by the deception of ignorance, I rejoiced in what was done. But now seeing these mistakes from my heart, I declare them to the Buddhas. Yeah. So this particular way of confession is by confessing all the negativities generally, right? So we conceptualize kind of negativity generally, and we confess that. So it says in this life and in others. So that means not just the negativities that I remember in this life, but just generally thinking with an understanding also all of the negativities I've accumulated since beginningless lifetimes within samsara. I confess those. And just not the evil that I did myself directly, but the evil or the negativity that I may have influenced others to do on my behalf.
다 마고비 디바르주 야소노 또나 지치는 배도 여기서 왔어.
And Geshe said that you could even take it further, and also, since this is a very general confession, think also offering up any future mistakes I might make in confession.
다 알았는지 다 오나 대지 가르치는데서 뜻을 주비다 내데스.
So verse number 29 answers the question, why did I do that, right? Why did I engage in that negativity? Overwhelmed by the deceptions of ignorance.
빼나가로서 도 첨보치 소소 토르잖아. 야친 까마토나.
Now so dodi ola.
도 첨보 되게 내서나.
Yeah.
내 노지 또 미고 내내를 까니라.
That's
다디 범고서.
So we're compelled to negativity. It is said that the ignorance is holding us into negativity, much as being under a boulder on a mountainside would kind of push us into the earth. Yeah. So overwhelmed by the deception of ignorance, I think the Tibetan is really kind of like compelled to abide by the deception of ignorance. So it should give an image of this ignorance really like holding you down. That's what Geshe is trying to say. So overwhelmed by that ignorance, then I engaged in negativities. And not only that, but I also rejoiced when others did similar things. So from the heart, then, confessing that to the holy beings. It's actually said that this is something we need to be really careful of. So it's like asking, can I say something? Like, of course you can. I'm like, the rules feel like they change sometimes. So this practice, I just think like this Tibetan word, the spirit of it is translated best by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who used the term negative rejoicing. So that term negative rejoicing means when something bad happens to somebody, or somebody does something bad to somebody that we don't like, we rejoice in it. We feel good about it. And Geshe was saying that actually this is the door to the accumulation of many faults. So we need to be very careful about it. So there's a story actually that illustrates this point. And so Geshe says he knows that many of you like stories. So he'll share the story here. So the Buddha Shakyamuni, at one time, he had a relative of his who was maybe kolochunga nishus koleka So he was so he was attending the Buddha, helping the Buddha for 15 or 20 years. But you know, because he was close to the Buddha, because he was attending him, all that he saw was faults, right? And his mind became kind of so obsessed with these faults that he perceived that after a while he was no longer able to do that job, actually. So he would get really annoyed by the Buddha because, you know, in those days, you're sharing a living space, of course. And then when the night fell, the Buddha would be sitting in meditation and it would like disturb his mind because he wanted to get to sleep, but he didn't feel he could. And so he thought, like, when is this old bunk going to go to sleep? Like, this is really irritating, right? And so he started to develop a fault-finding attitude.
다 키친에 예대체는 맞다. 시주주단에 다 무슨 거다 로튼 지르 원대대 말이야.
So even the things that actually were maybe worthy of praise, due to his perception, he saw these as faults. And this was something that really upset his mind.
아니 마치를 군달 수지 고자는데 그걸 키가 건너마더니 하고서라 그 너머 어두레래서 키게 치모지잖아.
Don't really
그 수진이 봐요.
Ale, go and so one time, because he was getting really annoyed by this, when the Buddha had been sitting in meditation for a really long time, he shouted, "There's a ghost, there's a spirit," to try to rouse the Buddha from his meditation.
아니 수지 콜란 드리피도 벌하기 와서 수지. 저러 할래 때 못해서 가르쳐서 자도나 때지. 리파메 때지 오래스. Yeah.
So the Buddha opened his eyes and he said, a foolish one, did you really think that that method would work? I have defeated all of the afflictions, so how could I fear a ghost, right? So that was the Buddha's answer. So the Buddha kind of like tried to explain that to him, but the situation didn't improve, and he finally had to leave this job, right? And so it was actually from that first attendant of the Buddha being fired that another relative of his cousin, Ananda, became the primary kind of helper of the Buddha. Yeah. And so when the Buddha called Ananda and requested him to be the attendant, Ananda, Geshe said, was very clever. So he insisted on some ground rules. And Geshe said he's not sure if there were 8 or if there were 10, but there were 10 things that he said the Buddha had to agree with before he would accept the job. And so he said that if the Buddha accepts this list of 8 or 10 things, then I will serve him as an attendant. Otherwise not. Yeah. So Geshe said that we'll share some of these rules later, but just give maybe a couple of examples. So the first one that Ananda insisted on was that if a king or a noble person invites the Buddha for a meal, for example, unless I am specifically invited, Blessed One, do not compel me to accompany you. So he didn't want to have to go to a place the Buddha was invited unless he was also invited.
So
if they also invite me, then yes, I will accompany the Buddha to the offering, to the house, but if they do not invite me, I will not go. So Ananda was very intelligent, and he knew that if he started accompanying the Buddha to places uninvited, this would create problems for him with the other Sangha members, right? They would see him as entitled. So Geshe said that Geshe said he wants to get to the rest of the story, but anyways, this is one of the points. Sorry. The lo nishus kungawa ko lo nishus lega che so dene lo nishu kabula ko chiwa chikyang tamasong so sung should the younger sung ro ches
손질 코로니 깨자 뭐 시에서 와. 알레. 로스. 깨자셔는 깨자 윤조 저와 찌마도 도마니레스.
거기면 돼.
아제.
그네 전에 거기면 돼.
손질 코로니 뭐 깨자 뭐 시에서 와스.
Yes. So it was said that in the 20 years that Ananda accompanied the Buddha, all of the sort of advice and instruction that the Buddha gave, he was able to kind of remember completely. There was only one exception when he had to ask to hear something again. So that is kind of the intelligence and the memory that Ananda was said to possess. And so this story is actually connected with this this attitude of negative rejoicing that we said we should avoid. So at this time there was a war in the land where the Buddha was from, and many people had died, but there were two children who were survivors of that conflict, and they were brought before the Buddha. And the Buddha hid these two children. They were very small infants under his begging bowl. But then when the conflict had been pacified in the land of the Buddha and it was safe for the children to go back, when he took off the offering bowl, the two children had passed away. And so the Buddha possessed clairvoyance to know why this tragedy had happened. So when his disciples asked him about the war and all of the people from that region dying, he explained that in a previous lifetime, they had taken a giant fish, almost like a whale, kept it barely alive, but slowly peeled away the flesh to eat over a very long period of time. So that was the reason that they had died. The two children, they were able to escape and live for a little bit longer, but they also eventually died. The reason that those two children died was because in that previous lifetime, they had not taken part in eating and torturing the fish, but they had rejoiced and thought it was great that others were doing so. So this is the danger of negative rejoicing. So they didn't peel the flesh away, right? They didn't actually participate in the harm to the whale, but as they gazed upon others doing it, they laughed and they praised those negative actions. So this was the negative rejoicing. And so it is said that the army, the king of the land of the army that defeated all of the people in that country, he was the rebirth of that whale. He had taken the form of a king and was exerting some revenge. And so we will also come to the question that Ananda had to ask the Buddha, but first we're going to continue a little bit with the text. So in this way, the confession chapter not only confessing the negative misdeeds that we have done, but also the ones that we have rejoiced in. So now we are going to go down to that service. Now we're going to go to the Sherab Ningpo, to the Heart Sutra. So now we are actually we did the paths of accumulation and preparation. We also talked about the 8 points related to the path of seeing. So now we are on the path of meditation in terms of these 5 paths. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit lost as to where we are. Okay, so we are on page 8 in the prayers for teaching occasions, and we're at this verse, Shariputra, therefore in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. So we're stopping right here at no consciousness. Yeah. So at the time when the Bodhisattva is on the path of seeing and in meditative equipoise on emptiness, then then this is the point where we're saying that there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, and no consciousness. So the 5 skandhas or aggregates. So there's different ways of understanding this. One is that emptiness, because emptiness is something that is so profound and so subtle, that its nature does not possess any form. So the nature of emptiness itself does not possess any form. That's the easy way to explain. It's like saying that space has no form, right? Because empty space also has no form. So that's the easy way to explain it. When we come to the path of meditation, we understand that when we say there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, suktang jadang jo aro jinso yomares karinsena kunso tongni mato tongyo. It's because in the path of meditation, on the path of meditation, when the mind is in meditative equipoise on emptiness, it is only emptiness that is being held within the mind, right? And there is nothing else coming in like forms. Yeah. So when we say that there are no of these 5 aggregates, we can understand that the time of this is when the mind is in meditative equipoise upon emptiness. Yeah. So then we have gone through these 5 skandhas. And after going through the 5 skandhas, we then come to the 18 dhatus. 18 sana dinso chatsongwa nyamdu yenarwa. Maribe.
말이 주니 그거만 실제 주니.
Sorry. We come to the first. We come to the 12 dhatus. Geche chungisana. Sorry, nga Gautamson Karinsana namgin ganso chuge dinso namgin.
다 저제 그건 이제는 연결해야 스틸라 잡아.
Lagere duas. Ine dinso chikpo labia tsik nga kandes peje tangore hamoko. Sorry.
실제 주니 가정하니 홀에서 들어가라 뭐도 실제 주니. 실제 주 농기 실제 주.
Right. So.
저분들.
Sorry.
다음은 저거도 시의 주 주다 저로야. 시대 시인의 주.
Yeah.
농기의 주 옹보주.
Yeah.
주니.
Yeah. Then it kandes lagore ganso chatsang nyamdu kandes.
실제 주니.
Yeah. Yene then di dang jawa karedu.
세는 대용자 말에서 돈이지 비생활.
So what we are saying here is that the 6 sense powers, as well as the 6 objects of those sense powers, such as sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, and so forth, they are not being perceived when the mind is meditating upon emptiness. Yes. So we have first these 5 aggregates, then the 6 objects of the senses and the 6 sense powers together for 12. Not so how do meet me now me now.
No, they not as once. Ta make a come bani, each come.
Yeah. So then we come to the next part of the Heart Sutra that says there is no I element and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element.
Oh, that tikal karikecha karishigare,
and so when we say no I element and so on, up to no mind element and no mental consciousness element, this is just a few words, right? But it is all of the 18 sources or constituents or dhatus that are considered here. So there is no I element. This gives the I element in terms of the 6 sources of the sense faculties, right? As well as all of the other sense powers. So the eye sense power along with the ear sense power and the nose sense power and so forth. Yeah, so it just names like kind of the first one, and then it says, and so on, right? So it includes all of those sense powers, which we describe as the support, the 6 sources of the sense faculties. And then we say up to and including no mind element. So just one thing, yigi nampa shepa, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. So then within these we have all of the objects of that give the objects of the senses, sight, sound, smells, tastes, and so forth, which are the observed objects, as well as all of the 6 sense consciousnesses.
This one,
Mikyu dang nampar shegi kam. Tonglam kabla gomlam. So then at this moment, when the in the path of meditation, when the mind is in meditative equipoise upon emptiness, these 18 are not appearing.
ko choje de la to shi bo shi ga re mi ba ye je ko tu de on bi ko tu de ma no shi je ko tu ko choje se ga re.
And so when we talk about these 18 dhatus or constituents, it's really important to understand these three categories. So the 6 sources of the observed object, that's the sight, sound, and smells, the support, the sources of the 6 sense faculties, the eye sense power, ear sense power, nose power, and then the 6 sources of consciousness, so the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so forth that arise from those.
다 이게 제시에도 돌로도 걸로를 시기야 다 소설만 단단히 놀래는 봐.
So
the
perspective, right, that the sutra is speaking about is those who are on the path of seeing, and especially the path of meditation. But as the reader of the sutra, we want to try to relate this to our own experience as much as possible. So all of the misperceptions that arise, So what we should understand for ourselves is all of our objects of enjoyment, right? The sounds, smells, and so forth, right? Although they appear to us to be truly existent, none of them have any inherent existence at all. And so we have to understand how that grasping at that inherent existence of those things gives rise to our attachment and aversion, and then challenge it as we contemplate emptiness. And we can experiment doing this according to the Prasangika, the Sautantrika, and the Chittamantran school, and so forth.
So
the Chittamantran, the mind-only view, says that everything that we are perceiving, those sights, sounds, and so forth, happens from an imprint ripening within our mind, which leads to the appearance of that thing. But there is nothing from the side of the object at all. It's all coming from the mind. And so when we say no visual form, no sound, no odor, from the mind-only point of view, we can think that way. And the Prasangika view is saying that object, right, the way that we perceive it is not the way that it actually is. Yes, and in the Prasangika view, what they're challenging is that if we were to find some pinpointable essence, right? If we were to try to seek some pinpointable essence, we would not be able to find it. So the Prasangika view is able to challenge a kind of misapprehensions, both from the side of the object, the phenomena, as well as the subject, the object possessor. Whereas the mind-only school is really just focusing on the misapprehensions from the side of the object. It's not able to address the object possessor completely.
Malonula Ganzonda Manda Chapa Shesa, Kundo Shesa Nets Momochile Muduas, they can say no to Jiramato, Zani Korea and
So in the Prasangika view also, we talk about phenomena as being like dreams, right? As being like the appearance that arise in a dream. But if we were to try to seek them, we would not be able to find them, that they are within the mind. These are some of the
Ota tindi chene ngazo tuni te soso nyola la pasha yachi. Soso che ja jojo se ja dia. Ya temata.
Sena ngako makone kuso kogyo mare.
Ota te chito munde ni kan dona doga res. Hale ya munde ni kan doga. Oh tenda soso nyola la page pheto bachi so yare.
So we want to think about emptiness in a way that it is going to be able to benefit our practice.
Oh this is full on that kids to tiso ya.
Geshe didn't like the doubt that I had, but Nachiklagi and Consola, I don't see the difference. So what I was objecting to Geshe about, I don't see the difference between what we said the mind-only view was, that everything was made by mind, and with the Prasangika example of the dream. Is this only me or is that confusing?
See, that is it. Say some detail. Never she told me to us.
Yeah.
Tanji, you do it. Kanga, Roger, never so told you.
Di love so much. What? Mare. Yine chat sangwa milam res, not so sem sotares, and the sem samba gitawa chat sangwa ngarang sem sotares, yuging on the legio mares.
Yeah, I say Roger to Batanda to us. Say some bala.
Okay. So Geshe is saying that the difference is in that the mind-only school, they're not looking at the subject, at the object possessor. So in all of their examples, they're assuming that the mind is something inherently existent. So that is where the difference is.
So Geshe
said that it's also really important. We think it's not prasangika, therefore the mind-only view is something that's not useful, right? This is actually incorrect. The mind-only school are like the stairs that can lead us to an understanding of the prasangika view. So it can't completely uncover how things are lacking inherent existence, the Chittamantran view, but it can definitely lead us into the direction of an understanding.
Huh?
So the mind only and also the Sautantrika school of Madhyamika, right? They cannot really completely, with their philosophies, sort of prove a complete lack of inherent existence. But based upon those two schools, the mind only and the Sautantrika, they're very beneficial in helping us reach an understanding of how all things lack an inherent existence. So when we go to this like a supreme view to the roof, right, we need to go up the stairs on the levels underneath that. So maybe from Kedrip's complaint, we got to a little bit of a better understanding. Sorry, no, I usually don't push the envelope so much, but I was like, if I'm confused, I must be confusing you guys, right? So sometimes, even though it takes a little time, it's good to clear it up. But Geshe said he thinks we came to some benefit. Yeah, so it was good. He's nervous because he thinks Geshe said he's nervous. He thinks we're running out of time. But hopefully from that banter back and forth, I'm sorry, I know sometimes it bores you guys a bit, but hopefully we came to a good result of that, to a better understanding. So when we actually come to the understanding of the sections of the Heart Sutra based on the 5 paths, when we come to the path of meditation, that's actually one of the most difficult ones to understand. And there's a lot of philosophical disputes back and forth about the meaning of the sutra, specifically through the lens of the path of meditation.
오다 텐도 지를 자로 뭐지나 달라가고 지츠가 야레서 오다 텐가조 가세 테도 지라가 테다 알다기 되기로.
So there's one particular point related to this, and Geshe said that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has actually said that this is perhaps one of the most difficult points to understand within the sutra as it relates to the path of meditation. So maybe we can come to a discussion about it later, but maybe people aren't interested. So we'll see. So we will now dedicate the merits. It's like, be quiet, Kendra. Okay, let us dedicate the merits. Jangjo Samjo Rinpoche Maje Banam Jeju Rechi Chewa Nyamba Meba Yong Gone Gondu Pewa Jo Toni Tawa Rinpoche Maje Banam Jeju Rechi Chewa Nyamba Meba Yong Gone Gondu Pewa Jo Jambel Bao Jida Jamba Dong Kundu Zambo Deyon Deje De Deda Kungi Jesu Dalo Che Gewa Dida Damje Rabdu Go Dizo Shebe Gyawa Tongje Je Ngowa Gangla Chodu Ngapa De Dagi Ge Zawan Dege Jong Zambo Jeji Rada Ngowa Kanri Rawe Kowe Shinkan Se Pendang Dewa Malin Jungwe Ne Shinre Ziwa Tenze Jatso Yi Shabe Se De Bada Tengyo Je. So if you just give me a moment, I'm going to adjust the volume so that we can hear your questions. All right, that should be good. So please go ahead, everybody, if you have a question.
아니 소소소 놀이나 이시라니 뭔데 도바테지자 바체 메바조야로 소소코가 뭐요아레스.
Yeah, so Geshe said actually if you engage in a practice of reciting the Heart Sutra at home, right? He really recommends this because it's an opportunity to accumulate merit, also to clear away obstacles, but also to contemplate and come to a better meaning.
바체가 좋았던지도 다든지 소소나면 용식을 와서 다든지 가는데 ner때는 다자자 자동에도 요아레스.
So when we're in a period in our life where we're experiencing many obstacles, right? Where we feel discouraged and the mind is tight, reciting the Heart Sutra is really one of the most powerful practices we can do. Yeah. Okay. Ale.
소소 간내나 원데 ngwana wa sanan jiwo ya ma was
Ale.
Pelishirani bujun.
Ale.
Machizu me na me da me na me za la vikala.
Yeah.
Propaje no mandonela.
Yeah.
So mo la ga man ngo me ji so tandi wa.
Right. So Geshe was saying that there was a person who was chaparade. There was somebody, anyways, not sure if he was a monk or not, somebody who was reciting the sutra, and he was reciting it really slowly during the puja. And this was really irritating people. So he was saying like, there is no ear, there is no nose, there is no eye. And then he got annoyed and he said, just say there's no head. This is taking too long. Yeah. But Geshe said that, so there's two things. One is that the people should have been patient when the prayer is being recited. But there's also the other side, which is that, whatever your realization remain natural. So whatever kind of profound realization we have, we still have to fit into society, right? So we can't push on those other people too much. Yeah. So even those who possess realization, right, in our tradition, they're not always you're not really supposed to manifest too much of that realization. So yes, there are questions maybe. So go ahead, whoever would like to ask. Dave, I'm not sure who was first.
Yeah, go ahead, Dinah.
Dinah, yes, go ahead.
Hello. Tashi Dele. Hi, you had mentioned that imprints are left behind by the afflictions.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask, what is the antidote for those imprints doing the Heart Sutra practice? Or a combination of things?
Right. Nanso nyomong parpang pejela datong bakshak dinso dua roa nyunjit bakshak dinso dua roa nyomong gi bakshak me pasoya gitap kareyores perna shiram nimpo kyorgores bakshak dinso kandis me pasogores.
Mimita pacha teji pacha rapa soso noala peba meba zoya ndeba yona ditsembe joche tedijina uta koropoge nanzo tapa chawa noji tapa tale chawa noji.
So there's two kind of manifestations of these imprints or latencies left behind by the afflictions, the coarser ones and the more subtle ones. So the coarser ones, we can, get rid of them through practices of purification and visualization. You can imagine receiving the lights and nectars, and that these are clearing away the obscurations. Almost like when you're washing the dishes, it's clearing away like that film of grease that's left behind by the food. So just like that. But that's actually not the main thing that we try to get at when we uproot those imprints. But those imprints left behind by attachment, anger, and especially by ignorance, these have to be eradicated through thinking about the different categories of emptiness, coarse and subtle. So it's really through the reflection on the different types of emptiness that those are cleared away. Yes. And one of the assisting factors which we mentioned, right? We mentioned that without the method side, it's not going to be possible to completely eradicate these imprints left behind by the afflictions. So really, it's also the method side of cultivating love, compassion, that feeling of closeness, of connected with beings, which is really going to allow us to kind of purify the subtle aspects of those imprints. Why is this? Because we need an antidote which matches the negative cause that we've accumulated, right? So we need to cultivate love and compassion for all of those beings as clearing away all of those obscurations related to all of the harming of sentient beings that we've done in previous lifetimes. And also to understand when we talk about an imprint too, like when we talk about a karma that is accumulated, the way that this abides within the mind is as in Lady Bakshak Chakireng also Kirdu. Yeah. The way that this abides in the mind is as an imprint or as a latency. So that's true of both positive and negative karma, right? Once the karma, the action is completed, then it kind of abides within the mind as either a wholesome or an unwholesome imprint. Yeah. But just because it's abiding in this very subtle form doesn't mean that it can't bring forth a great result. And that's why it's said that from a very small seed, right, then a very great tree can grow.
신약에서는 나도 다 세니 연도냐들이 말했어.
Yeah. So that we call the self and that we call my mind, these are the things that are holding on to that seed.
다 레트 뭐단 디스 말했던 거지랬어.
Yeah. So that's how we would answer that one. Don't know if Dinah's still
Thank
there.
you.
Yeah, okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Leiraslan.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anybody else have anything? And if not, maybe on socials or something, Dave?
No.
No? Okay.
뭔데?
Yeah, Chio, what do you want to do?
두시가래.
Does anybody else have anything? All right. Jungshego.
야, 다원랑 얘기해줘서 그 페이지 두시가 있으리.
So then we'll end with a story about the benefits of the three jewels, if there's no questions.
뭐 빼나 곧다 사사 구조질 맞지다 그런 요 검열레지는 거 여보 지내다. 열레선에 되게 알았어. 맞지.
So this is the story about a meditator who was cultivating in a very remote place.
다 맞대요. 노사티를 사구조지에서 맞대요. 노사를 손바지 알았어.
And to get to this remote place, you had to cross a canyon, right? So there was a bridge that you would have to cross to come close to the meditation place.
손바티 고르세나 뭔데 손바티도 다 근다 체를 눈에 먹어요. 알았어. 그래서 고마라고.
And it is said that just underneath that bridge, there were some spirits or some ghosts that were living there. And they would be especially active during the nighttime.
노진이 단지 받침 못 쓰게 알았어.
So it was considered like a very, very scary place.
다녀마치 맞지 드네 코까마치 까마자야 근데 봐슈니라. 곰자키지 알았어.
Yeah.
거기서 까마자가 레스 왔어.
Yeah. And so then kumarjagin lebswa. And so then one day a thief was crossing that bridge and wanted to reach the meditation hut because he thought to rob something from the home of the meditator.
다 키쿠바노 개근은 이사레지 전에 다시 오르도 하고 알아. 개근을 kilapaya 다이 그러왔어. 아바자비칼 코니 그대 코니 그메네 키하고 통수 왔어. 모르티가.
And as he put his hand, Geshe said he's not sure if it was through the window or through the door to kind of pick up the object that he wanted to take. The meditator was actually not asleep. Although it was very dark night outside, he was not asleep. So he was able to see the hand.
근데 코니 그메 kilapa 시준이라. 그마트 라파 시준하러 왔어.
Yeah.
지산 기뻐지 치크네.
Yeah.
단 내가 치워시고 거세에서 못 왔어.
Yeah.
내가 치워 마시는 손질라 샤스 저거. 칠라 샤스 저거. 겐들라 샤스 저거 설 테마서 슈바레스.
And so he grabbed his hand, and the thief was not able to withdraw his hand from the window. And he took something, like maybe a belt or a stick, and he hit him. But Geshe said he didn't hit him very hard. He hit him very gently. And the first time he hit him, he said, I go for refuge to the Buddha. The second one, I go for refuge to the second one, I go for refuge to the Dharma. And the third one, I go for refuge to the Sangha. And so the meditator, of course, was very gentle. So although it was uncomfortable, it didn't create a lasting problem. But there was like some discomfort, maybe a little bit of a bump left over.
Listen.
Kumajagin. Yeah. And so the thief sort of left the hut, and then he came to the bridge, and because he didn't have a place to sleep that night, he decided to rest beside the bridge, right? And then as he looked at the bruises on his arms, he said, oh, today I really got it. I got it when he said, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha. He said, and it's lucky there's only 3 jewels, because if there was more than 3, I would have gotten a much worse beating, he thought. So he was not someone who had faith in the 3 jewels, but as he was kind of narrating what had happened to him, he was saying their names. Just from reciting, I go for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and to the Sangha without any particular conception or faith, this was enough to prevent any disturbance from the ghosts living under the bridge. Yeah. And after a couple of nights, the ghosts actually complained to him. They said, please stop reciting, I go for refuge to the Buddha, to the Dharma, and to the Sangha. It's completely immobilizing us. We're not able to do anything, and we can't go and try to secure the food that is our livelihood. So this really illustrates the power even just of the object of the words that express the three jewels, right? How incredibly powerful that is. So if even someone with no faith recites them with such an effect, think of how powerful reciting it is when we have faith. So it is said, we talked a little bit about, I think we talked about it yesterday. We said the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas cannot transfer realization to us. They can't clear away our negativities with the touch of a hand. But the practice of refuge is so powerful that when it is recited, it can prevent one. If one at the end of one's life is able to remember and go for refuge to the three jewels, even if one has accumulated terrible negativities, one can be protected from falling into the lower realms. That's how powerful it is. So that's why it's really important, this practice of refuge, to do it continuously. If we take refuge one day and forget it the next, we're not going to develop that habituation and get the benefit. Yep. So going for refuge and recollecting refuge is really how we create the relationship, our relationship with the three jewels. And that's how ultimately we're going to receive the benefit. So there's many stories of the time of the Buddha, you know, great rishis, meditators who had clairvoyance. One of them could see that in his future lifetime, he was going to be reborn as a pig, but he was able to recite the name of the Buddha and the triple gem and was able to purify and was reborn as a deva in one of the God realms. So there are many, many stories like this that illustrate the benefits of refuge. So if we keep that in mind, then really hopefully this will benefit our practice of refuge. So Geshe said, like, especially like if you look at some of the earlier teachings of His Holiness, this was also something that he really emphasized, that because I have refuge, then I do not have to fear harm by seen or by unseen beings, right? The refuge really protects one from fear. And think about how many places that His Holiness has traveled in the world, how many people he's met, how many potentially dangerous situations he's been in, but none of those were able to harm him, right? We can think that that's also because of that perfect practice of refuge. So that's an example that we can see in front of our eyes. Yeah, so Carol, go ahead. Geshe said short questions because we're at the end of the time. He's just teasing. Go ahead, Carol.
No. I was just going to say, because you said it was boring. It is really wonderful to see the interaction between you two. because it's so nice to see people who trust each other and joke about the Dharma and pull it to pieces and fix things. And it's just wonderful. I just want to say that. It's really, really lovely.
Na parsu
It's a
ke
privilege to see you both.
ang trane konso chi chena nyogires konso nyogi mares konso gagire tu asata.
저는 가는 것 같아서
Age? Yeah, he says it's more work for him though if he has to explain the things. Anyways, he's just kidding. No. We have a good time. I do, especially when it comes to emptiness, you know, I'll just say from my side, I just don't want to mislead you folks, right? So that's why yeah, he said there was a few verses he wanted to give me that he forgot to give me. He thinks I have it. I don't think I do. But anyways, we'll sort that out later. Dave, go ahead.
Yes, we have one question. Yes. So regarding imprints.
Yeah.
Both my brother-in-law and sister-in-law chose medical assistance in dying. A way it's really assisted suicide. Wondering how the imprints of their past harming could be related to the doctor, nurses, and people who subscribed to her suicide is connected. And then question, so that was first question. Other question, could this have been changed to something positive to them and others involved?
I don't see how the two fit together, to be honest.
So question about, the harm related to the doctor, nurses, and people who assisted her to commit suicide. And then also, how could this be changed to something positive?
Right. And then the second part?
But that was the second part. How can this be changed to something positive?
So is she asking about the cause of how that happened?
I guess so. So I'll read it again.
Yeah.
Wondering how the imprints of their past harming could be related to the doctor, nurses, and people who subscribe to her suicide is connected.
Oh, I see. So they harmed people in the past. So the result of that was that there were doctors and nurses who agreed to perform this procedure?
I suppose, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the last one is how could this have been changed to something positive to them and everyone else involved?
So Chiwa dire nganzo tanda nepa sa champo yimpe kapola roa rangjin gi sea gi netso chik dua roa ane kochena bakchak samlo tangna soso ngema semchin jenda nepa kene jebu di nganzo mitse di nangla samsu duksha di menchap dang mempa ropa chegen ragi rebes ane rangjin sea gi tapdi nganzo netso duksha chik yapo kandes chik sogoresa.
So
Geshe said that first of all, he's reluctant to speak upon this issue because he knows how contentious it is, and he's worried that maybe what he says is not accepted or not the right thing.
Roji saya telaka chabayina ko men ro yo no to tangene ndegre hale amadwas
Yeah hago so
ta ina yo koro tanda kangen yo gaya te ndibu chira de yo dito ndibu saba chizi vares
yeah jebu nyongo gigi di mepa so tu gyo mares
to mato ndibu ra so as ndibu ra ba mazi dito yonju gaya ke ten digo sabo chikizo no vares.
So from the perspective of the teachings, right, and Geshe said he's not judging, but he's asked for the perspective of the teaching, so that's what he has to share. When we are in a situation where we're in a lot of maybe physical and mental distress as we come to the end of our life, the medical assistance in dying, the maid, right, that relieves us from that suffering more quickly. But it does not address the cause of that suffering. Because we have not fully experienced the result of that suffering as the pain or the discomfort or whatever, part of the cause of that suffering is going to remain with us, and it will have to be experienced as a result later. Also adding to, right, the karma of choosing to end one's own life makes the picture even more complicated. So he would say that.
예, 손을 또 왔댔지나.
Yeah, yeah.
그거 둥아 돈들 내내라. 그거 보게.
Don't do the
둥아 쉬나요?
Shunayo.
아니 그거 뭐 디웅 양바 먹고 지존도 그
Zojo,
손을 달 손을 또 야.
So really, it's really about faith in cause and effect in karma, with the understanding of the person who is experiencing this, that this difficulty that I am experiencing is clearing away that negative karma. And from experiencing it, I will not have to experience the results of that karma again, right? That's the awareness.
하고 서로 다 치킬레킬렌데 킬레키도 다시마 킬레키지는 다 드니존의 손을 또 가지 듣다 봐. 놀래진 거야. 다들 하자고 말했어.
So Geshe is not imposing this belief on anybody, and he realizes that everybody has their own belief. But if one is somebody who is following the traditional teachings of the Dharma, and also somebody who is having faith in past and future lifetimes, this would be the way to think about it, actually.
만족 보고 주시가라서는 뭐도 배를 다 대를 라마레서 다 다시도 그게 말해. 라마 자치 뭐지 알아서. 그 담을 다 나니를 주도 자니를 봐. chen 대토요 뭐 야로인 거 세잔. 이나 주잔.
Yeah.
아 대토요 말.
Ale kadina yarlango. Ni kutugi mar. Ale ni kuna de.
디세치라.
Los.
주자거든 그 야로는 당인 디강인디. 아니 저 도대체 뭐 조시부 사시부터 뭐 간데 바시에 강간 매와서 대주주병장 말해.
So there was an example of a practitioner who his body had some sort of physical impairment, whereas when he tried to lie down, this would become very painful. So as he was lying down, he would get up, and then he said, from me, when he got up each time, he would fold his palms and say, from me experiencing this difficulty, may His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all the other holy beings be completely free of obstacles. So he decided to think about it in that way. So even though there was that extreme kind of experience of discomfort, right? He was able to take his mind into a place where he made that prayer.
The
other way to think about it is just that through those experiences of discomfort, those negativities are being purified, and we're not going to have to experience that result again, right?
This way.
Yeah. Yeah, so Geshe said he's not he's a reluctant commenter on this issue, but if you were to ask him what he has to say about it, that's what he has to say. He realizes that it's not an easy issue. Yeah. Is this how we're ending? Feels a bit morbid, but I guess so. As a Dishagererwa. Okay, this is the last question. Yes, so yes. So Geshe doesn't want to end on such a sad note either, right? So he says that, maybe don't think about this particular instance, but you can think about any instance where you're experiencing an obstacle or experiencing suffering, and thinking that, through me experiencing this, may the cause of that be purified. And then that experience of suffering becomes a source of purification and a potential accumulation of merit. Carol, did you have your hand up? I couldn't really tell.
Yeah, I was going to quickly say, because when in a few weeks' time we have the Sakya teacher coming, the Kempo. Yep. I wonder, because the book he read that was recommended is quite fat, and I don't know if in 2 weeks it can be digested. So I wondered if Geshe Sonam would be so kind as to suggest a good way that we prepare to delve into these debates. He might have some advice.
Konso Dendrakashi Jela Dene Sakya Lama Chik Sakya Tompani Gitawa Kola Shegire Duas. Dev Chik Tagoresine Dev Di Halepe Gyakpayan Sang Pesha Tsariam and Duas. Adi Samlo Tang Tang Chik Yeres. Roa Konso Dratik Songshiden Soshia Dratik Kandes Chik Sogas.
Me Lama Koro Dechi Karapecha to you, teacher so Kitchen.
Keshichito, Kolau Swangala, Nina Di Mangtrane Konso.
Yeah,
so Geshe said that he's not sure how the teaching is going to go, right? Because we wanted Geshe's idea, and also so I facilitated this. He wanted to invite someone from the Sakya tradition to speak about the Sakya tradition. Right? This was the reason. But he also said because of that, right, he's not sure what his angle is going to be and not sure what the book is. But out of the book, maybe just try to see what the main philosophical points are, or what a summation of those might be in the introduction.
And
also just to understand, right, that it's not just through receiving one teaching on the Sakya understanding of emptiness that we're going to be able to understand it, right? But that it's just like a taster, and it's something that we want to think about again and again to refine our understanding of emptiness. Thanks so much, everybody. I guess we'll end it here. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.